everyone. So for today's video, I wanted to do kind of a part 2 of my resolutions video that I put out at the beginning of January, but I thought it would be interesting to go over some of the things that I resolved not to do in my garden this year. Now, some of these things I tried last year and they just didn't work, so I know I don't want to do them this year. Some of these things I've been doing for multiple gardening seasons and just can't get myself into a good habit, but I'm going to try to do it this year. So first off, what I wanted to start with are some of the plants that I won't be growing in the garden this year. Now I have a more detailed video that was at the end of the gardening season last year where I went over the plants I will definitely be growing and some of those that I won't be growing. So I'll just more briefly mention them here, and I think I might include some more that I didn't in the last video. But starting off are any type of melon plant. So I did watermelon, cantaloupe, and honeydew last year. And while it was exciting to grow something for the first time, I had never grown melons before. I didn't even know you could really do it that well in containers, but I had 8 plants because I couldn't force myself to get rid of any of the seedlings that were healthy enough to grow into full-size plants, but they just took up way too much room. I think my deck is about 18 by 20 square feet. Might be a little bit smaller, but there's not a ton of room basically. And the melon plants themselves, I'd say there were maybe 3 or 4 vines on some of them, a little bit more, that spanned out at least 8 feet. And they just took over. They took over one of my raised beds, they took over a lot of the ground area, and each plant produced 2 to 3 melons that I could actually eat, which for me, if I'm only getting 2 to 3 melons off of a plant, whereas compared to, let's say, one cherry tomato plant where I'm getting hundreds, or an eggplant where I'm getting, I don't even know, 20 to 30 eggplant off of one plant, I don't think they produce enough to be worth taking up that much space in my garden. Now, there is potential to do some sort of vertical trellising system, but again, I think just production-wise, I don't know if it's gonna be really worth it for me to put in all that extra work to find a way to grow them if I don't really like how much I get from each plant. But we will see. I did have somebody send me a really cute melon variety that kind of made me wonder if I should just go ahead and try one more melon, but I'm gonna hold off for this year. Maybe I'll try it again in a future year. Other things I don't plan to grow: broccoli, even though I still have some seeds that are at least a few years old now. I grew them, I think, 4 different growing seasons. So in the spring and fall, I'm counting those as 2 different times that I've grown them, and I think I've done 4 rounds of them. They did really well the first round, got big beautiful heads, and then the last 3 the weather just hasn't been cooperating, and I will either get nothing and then it gets too cold, or I get very tiny florets around the whole broccoli head. So I don't think I'm going to do anything like that. There's some other plants like geraniums that just attract budworms that I'm not going to grow. So that's kind of on a high level of plants that I'm not going to grow in the garden this year. Again, if you want a more comprehensive list, I'll link that video below. But that's kind of the first thing I wanted to cover. Now, the rest of what I have on my list isn't plant specific, but it is garden related activity. So the next thing I'm not going to do, which was one of the first mistakes I made in the garden last year, is using my Soltech grow light to start seeds. Now, nothing on the website of Soltech ever said that you should do it, but it's the only grow light I had. So I did message them, and they said it might work if you keep it a few inches, below and then start to lower it. So I tried it out and they just failed. Basically, I'll put it in a clip here, the light, so you can see what it looks like, but it puts out light kind of in a funnel shape. So the light's in the middle, light goes like this. All the seedlings in the middle, even though I had them only a few inches away, they were starting to get leggy, and then everything on the outside was getting leggy going that way, even if I rotated it or shifted it. So I just don't think that was the best light source to use to start my seeds. I still don't have lights that I can use as grow lights for seed starting. I think that's something that I'll look into in the future. So what I'm going to try to do this coming year is just done what I've done in years past, which is put my seed trays in front of the glass doors. In our previous place that we were renting, we actually had big, beautiful south-facing glass doors, and I could leave my seeds in front of those windows. I would just rotate which side was facing the window every day, and it did really well. Nothing was leggy, they grew beautifully. Here in our home now, we, again, in the city, you kind of face either north and south or east and west. Now we live in a place that faces east and west. So a little bit more work, but basically I'll start the seeds in the east side window in the morning, carry them over here to the windows that face the garden for the afternoon, and then in the night I move them back and just keep doing that. Again, it's not like it takes a ton of work to carry the seed trays. I usually have 2 or 3 trays of seeds because I don't start that many seeds since, again, I don't have a huge garden. So it's not that much extra effort, but I do miss having those giant, beautiful south-facing glass doors. So yes, not starting seeds with my Soltech light, although I will say it's done a fantastic job for my houseplants, especially over winter. Next is not putting extremely tall plants in my center raised bed, but really in any of my elevated raised beds. So I have 4 raised beds total. 3 of them I think are about 3 feet off the ground. The other one I think is maybe only 1.5 feet, so I could put tall plants there. But I had my giant zinnias in the middle of my center raised bed. They grew over 5 feet tall, and every time there was a windstorm, I would just nervously look out these windows here with my fingers crossed, hoping that the plants make it through. So a few reasons that I'm not going to do that this year is, one, I don't have to worry about them every time there is a stronger than normal breeze. And then also when I'm looking at the garden here, with that center raised bed, it blocked the view of everything I was growing behind it. So I would rather do things that are a bit shorter so that I can have a better view of the other plants that are growing, and then just to make sure that they're actually protected from the wind. So the walls around our decks are maybe about, I'm really bad at estimating heights, 3.5 to 4 feet tall. So it does do a pretty good job of blocking the wind for anything that's shorter than that, but once we get up a little bit taller, like my greenhouse, the wind can definitely do some damage up here on our 3rd floor balcony. So I'm going to do just more planning in general next year of the plant heights and where specifically I'm going to put them. But the giant zinnias will for sure be in my garden, just a pot that's a little bit lower to the ground. Now the next one kind of goes into that issue, and that is I am not going to forget to stake my plants this year. And it's not so much as I forget, it's that I put the plant in the ground, I know it's gonna need a staking system, I tell myself I'll get to it later, and I don't get to it until it's absolutely necessary, and the plant is probably gonna fall over if I don't. I think the only plant that I'm really good at staking initially are tomato plants. Those, I throw them in there, put the cage, they do great, but like what I mentioned, my giant zinnias, I didn't have any sort of system that was helping keep them in place, so by the end of it I just had twine that I was wrapping around the outside of all of them to try to keep them upright. Same thing with my sunflowers, my dahlias, it was all just a mess of twine. My snap peas that I was growing, which need to grow up something, I didn't have anything in there when I first started growing them in the spring, so this just kind of goes into the whole planning better part of what I hope to do this year, but I want to make sure that I am correctly staking things when I put them into the ground, or hopefully very soon after, instead of waiting till it's absolutely necessary. But that's one that I've done every year. I've made that same mistake, so we'll see if I actually fix that mistake this year or not. Next is I want to not have as many random small pots of plants around the garden for a few different reasons. First is just the drip system. So the more tiny pots I have, the more drips I'll need on the system. I don't know if the one system that I have can handle as many as I would necessarily need. I think you can hook up 3 like drip lines to one kit. And I think I'm probably at like 1.5, but I also just don't want a bunch of drip lines running everywhere in my garden. So I'd rather have larger containers, fewer larger containers with multiple plants in each container, instead of a bunch of like random terracotta pots around. If I don't run drip to them, I'll have to hand water them. So again, I'd like to just eliminate the amount of things that I have to hand water in the garden. The other reason is that I want to focus more on the overall aesthetic design of the garden this year. I know plants that I like, and I know plants that I'm going to get year over year. So there was some stuff in my 2021 garden that I knew the place where I put it, I really liked it. And then the other stuff was kind of just ad hoc, throwing whatever plant in whatever pot and just plopping it on the deck. So just to have a more like cohesive look to it, I really do want to focus more on design and putting plants in a place with a purpose. I'll probably still have a combination of that versus just throwing random plants wherever, but I do want to be more conscious of the overall look of my garden, especially on the plants that are out front of these two windows where I look every day and can see out into the garden. So we'll see how different the garden looks this year compared to last. Another thing that I want to not do, and this is something that I do again every year, is I want to not ignore all of the plans that I make for my garden in the winter. So what happens, and I don't know if you can relate, let me know if you can, but during the winter I have all this spare time because I'm not out in the garden and I'm just dreaming, especially after the holidays are over, dreaming of what my garden is going to look like. So I sit down and I lay out my plan, I do a little drawing of what plants I want where, I have my whole seed starting schedule, which I'm gonna have a video with my dock that I use for seed starting, and I have everything laid out. And then I actually start to get into the point where I'm planting things in the garden and I ignore everything that I have created over the winter. So it's kind of like I'm just filling that time in the winter doing these things and then don't actually use any of the plans. And I think that'll kind of help tie into the last thing of just focusing on the overall design of my garden. So I'm really gonna make an effort, and I think what my issue was in the past is that I do all this stuff on my computer, so I have it like just in Drive files, which is great in terms of how I like to like organize myself, but then I just leave them on my computer and I never look at them again. So I think if I actually print them out, which we do have a printer, I don't know if we have ink, so we'll have to look into that, but if I can actually print out stuff and even just like post it on my desk or on the wall as a constant reminder of what my plans are, it'll be much harder to ignore. And I mean, I put all this time into it and I really do like the stuff that I plan on doing. It's just, I feel like once you get out into the garden, you can kind of just get swept up and taken away and forget everything that you had actually planned to do. So I think that's pretty much everything that I want to not do in my garden for 2022. I'm sure there will be other things that pop up, but those are the things that either, like I said, specifically failed last year, so I want to make sure I don't make that same mistake this year, or it's something that I repeatedly don't do that I need to stop doing. So we'll see how it goes this year. I do have high hopes for the garden. We actually, trying to think, this is the first, no, 2020 is when we moved into our house. So 2021 was the first full year that we were actually in our house and I could just plan the garden. So now I have kind of a year under my belt of experience as far as what works in this space and what doesn't. So I'm really excited to see kind of how much I can take from the last year and carry it into 2022. So that is it. If there's anything that you want to make sure you don't do in your garden this year, or that you already know you aren't going to do, let me know in the comments below. But other than that, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.